Detachment is one of the most misunderstood concepts in relationships, especially for men who genuinely cared, invested, and showed up emotionally. Most men hear the word detachment and assume it means becoming cold, distant, angry, or emotionally shut down. That's not detachment, that's resentment wearing the mask of strength. True detachment is calm, it's grounded. It's the quiet decision to stop giving your time, energy, and emotional presence to a situation that no longer honors who you are. When she thought losing you was nothing, it wasn't because you lacked value as a man. It was because your value was always available, always accessible, and therefore taken for granted. Detachment begins the moment you stop trying to prove your worth. As long as you're explaining yourself, defending your intentions, chasing clarity, or asking her to recognize what you bring to the table, you are subconsciously communicating that you don't fully believe in your own value. Women don't respond to words about value. They respond to behavior that demonstrates it. Detachment is that behavioral shift. It's when you stop negotiating for attention and start choosing yourself without anger, without bitterness, and without needing her validation to feel complete. When you were present all the time, when you replied instantly, adjusted your schedule, tolerated inconsistency, and emotionally leaned in harder when she pulled away, she slowly stopped feeling the weight of your presence, not because she's cruel, but because human psychology adapts to consistency. What's always there stops feeling special. Detachment disrupts that pattern. It removes the emotional certainty she had about you always being there no matter how little effort she put in. That removal isn't loud, it's subtle, and that subtlety is what makes it powerful. Detachment forces you to confront something uncomfortable, the realization that love without self-respect eventually becomes self-betrayal. You weren't wrong for loving deeply. You weren't wrong for caring. Where things shifted is when you started placing her comfort, her moods, and her approval above your own emotional well-being. Detachment is the correction of that imbalance. It's you saying internally and externally, I value connection, but not at the cost of my dignity. When she thought losing you was nothing, it was because she never truly felt what life was like without your emotional contribution. Your listening, your support, your consistency, your masculine grounding, all of that became background noise because it never went away. Detachment introduces silence where noise used to be, and silence makes people think. Silence creates contrast. Silence reveals absence, but detachment doesn't mean disappearing to manipulate a reaction. That's still attachment in disguise. Real detachment happens when you stop monitoring her responses, stop checking whether she misses you, stop hoping she'll suddenly realize your worth. The moment your peace no longer depends on her reaction is the moment detachment becomes authentic, and authenticity is what changes the energetic dynamic between you. A detached man isn't cold, he's centered. He's not angry, he's resolved. He doesn't punish, he simply withdraws access. That distinction matters. When you detach correctly, there's no drama, no speeches, no ultimatums. You just stop overgiving. You stop initiating conversations that go nowhere. You stop chasing emotional breadcrumbs. You stop making yourself available to someone who treats your presence as optional. This is where self-respect becomes visible. Self-respect is not something you announce. It's something people feel when they interact with you. Detachment signals self-respect because it shows you have standards. It shows you're not afraid of being alone. It shows you don't cling to situations that no longer serve your growth. And ironically, the moment you stop trying to hold on is often the moment she starts feeling the weight of what she lost. But even if she never does, detachment still wins, because the real victory isn't her regret, It's your emotional freedom. When you detach, you reclaim your energy. You stop pouring into a cup that never fills. That energy gets redirected into your purpose, your discipline, your physical health, your mission, and your future. You begin to feel like yourself again, not anxious, not overthinking, not waiting for messages, not replaying conversations in your head. Detachment teaches you something essential. Attraction doesn't grow through force, it grows through polarity. Masculine energy is grounded, decisive, and self-directed. Feminine energy responds to that stability. When you were attached, your emotional state rose and fell based on her behavior. That instability weakened attraction. Detachment restores polarity because it stabilizes you. You no longer need reassurance. You no longer need constant contact. You become emotionally solid, and solidity is magnetic. This is why detachment often feels scary at first. It feels like letting go of control. It feels like risking loss. But what you're really letting go of is the illusion that you could control the outcome by trying harder. Detachment is the acceptance that you can only control yourself, your actions, your boundaries, and your self-respect. And that acceptance is strength, not weakness. When she eventually notices the shift, it won't be because you said something clever or dramatic. It will be because your energy changed. You're no longer chasing. You're no longer available on demand. You're no longer emotionally reactive. That change creates curiosity. Curiosity leads to reflection. Reflection leads to realization, but again, that realization is a byproduct and not the goal. The goal of detachment is alignment. Alignment between your actions and your worth. Alignment between how you treat others and how you treat yourself. When those align, you become unshakable. Whether she comes back, stays gone, or reaches out months later, you're no longer operating from fear. You respond from choice, not need. And here's the hardest truth. If she never feels the loss, that doesn't mean detachment failed. It means the connection wasn't aligned with your long-term growth. Detachment doesn't just reveal your value to her, it reveals your value to yourself. It shows you that you don't need to beg to be chosen. You choose yourself first. And from that place, every relationship you enter becomes healthier, stronger, and more balanced. Detachment is not an ending, it's a return to your center, a return to your standards, a return to the man you were before you started shrinking yourself to keep someone else comfortable. And once you fully embody that, losing you will never feel like nothing again to anyone. One of the most powerful shifts a man can make in any relationship dynamic is learning when to stop reacting. Most emotional damage doesn't come from what is said or done, but from the constant back and forth reactions that keep energy trapped in a loop. When you react to mixed signals, cold behavior, delayed responses, or emotional withdrawal, you keep the connection alive on her terms. You may think you're fighting for clarity, fairness, or understanding, but what you're really doing is preventing her from feeling the consequences of her own behavior. And as long as she doesn't feel the consequences, she never has to reflect. Reaction gives comfort. Silence creates discomfort, and discomfort is what forces introspection. When you reacted emotionally, you were still present in her world even when she was pulling away. You were still explaining, still checking in, still seeking reassurance. From her perspective, nothing truly changed. She still had access to your emotional energy without having to invest much of her own. This is why she could believe losing you was nothing, because she never actually lost you. Your reactions kept you emotionally available even when the connection was fading. The moment you stop reacting, the emotional structure collapses. There is no argument to respond to, no long message to decode, no reassurance to lean on. There is just space. And space is dangerous for avoidance because space forces thought. It removes distraction. It removes emotional noise. In that silence, her mind begins to fill the gap you once occupied. This is where reflection begins. Reflection doesn't happen when emotions are loud. It happens when things go quiet. When you stop reacting, she begins replaying moments on her own. She notices the absence of your presence, your consistency, your grounding. She starts questioning assumptions she once held, especially the assumption that you'd always be there no matter what. That assumption is what allowed her to emotionally disengage without fear. Your silence dismantles it. But this only works when the silence is genuine. Silence used as a tactic is still reactive energy. It's still waiting, watching, hoping she notices. Real non-reaction comes from emotional independence. You're not withholding to provoke a response. You're simply no longer investing where there's no reciprocity. And that difference is felt on a deep level, even if nothing is spoken. Women are highly intuitive to emotional shifts. She may not consciously understand what changed, but she feels it. Your energy no longer seeks hers. Your presence no longer chases validation. That absence creates uncertainty, and uncertainty disrupts emotional complacency. Suddenly, she's no longer in control of the emotional tempo. She has to confront her own feelings instead of reacting to yours. This is also why arguments and emotional explanations rarely lead to respect or attraction. They provide stimulation, not reflection. They keep emotional engagement alive even if it's negative. Non-reaction removes stimulation entirely. There's nothing to fight against, nothing to resist, nothing to dismiss. Just the reality of life without your emotional input. As time passes, reflection deepens. She begins to recognize patterns she ignored before, the stability you offered, the way you showed up, the emotional safety you provided. These things often go unnoticed when they're consistent, but they become painfully obvious when they're gone. Detachment strips away familiarity and replaces it with contrast. But again, the most important shift is not hers, it's yours. When you stop reacting, you reclaim emotional sovereignty. You no longer allow someone else's mood, silence, or inconsistency to dictate your internal state. You stop checking your phone. You stop rehearsing conversations. You stop looking for hidden meaning in every interaction. Your mind clears and clarity returns. This clarity is crucial because it reveals how much energy you were giving away unconsciously. Reaction is exhausting. It keeps you emotionally tethered even when nothing is moving forward. Non-reaction cuts that tether. You begin to see the relationship objectively rather than emotionally, and objectivity leads to better decisions. There is also a deeper psychological shift happening. When you stop reacting, you remove the role you were playing in her emotional life. Maybe you were the stabilizer, the validator, the emotional anchor. When that role disappears, she has to confront the void it leaves. Some people try to fill that void quickly, others sit with it. Either way, the absence makes your impact real. This is when she may begin to reach out, not with clarity, but with curiosity, a message, a check-in, a vague attempt to reestablish connection. This is where many men fail because they mistake curiosity for commitment. They react too quickly, they overengage, they give emotional access without boundaries, and the cycle repeats. True non-reaction doesn't mean ignoring forever. It means responding from choice, not compulsion. It means maintaining your center regardless of what she does. If she reaches out, you don't punish or interrogate. You stay calm, grounded, and measured. You don't resume emotional availability until her behavior shows consistency and effort. But even if she never reaches out, non-reaction still accomplishes its purpose. It frees you from emotional dependency. It teaches you that your peace does not come from someone else's attention. It comes from self-control, from discipline, from boundaries. These are masculine traits that build not only attraction, but self-respect. The hardest part of non-reaction is facing the discomfort it brings initially. Silence can feel like loss, like surrender, like giving up. But what you're really surrendering is the illusion that emotional effort alone can fix misalignment. Non-reaction is the acceptance that you cannot negotiate desire or respect through emotional labor. Over time, this acceptance builds strength. You begin to trust yourself again. You trust that walking away from emotional inconsistency is not weakness. It's wisdom. You trust that you don't need to be understood by everyone to be grounded in who you are. When reflection turns into regret on her side, it often comes quietly, not with grand apologies or dramatic realizations. Sometimes it's just a subtle shift in tone, more effort, more warmth, more presence, or sometimes it's nothing at all. And that's okay, because by then you're no longer waiting. That is the ultimate power of non-reaction. It removes urgency, it removes desperation, it removes the need to win emotionally. You're no longer trying to prove anything. You're simply living in alignment with your standards. When you stop reacting, you don't disappear, you become unavailable to disrespect. And that distinction changes everything. It forces reflection where reaction once created noise. It creates space where chaos once lived. And in that space, truth emerges for her, and more importantly, for you. Detachment reveals value in a way words never can, because value is not something people intellectually understand first. It's something they feel over time. When she thought losing you was nothing, it wasn't because you lacked substance, depth, or masculine presence. It was because she had no contrast, your consistency was constant, your availability was predictable. Your emotional contribution blended into her daily life so seamlessly that she stopped noticing it. Human beings rarely appreciate stability while they have it. They recognize it only after it's gone. Detachment creates that gap where recognition becomes unavoidable. At first, detachment can look like indifference from her perspective. She may assume you've simply moved on emotionally, or that you were never as invested as she thought. In the early stages, she may even feel relieved. The pressure is gone, the expectations are gone, the emotional responsibility is gone. This is often why she initially feels validated in her belief that losing you was insignificant. But this stage is temporary, because relief fades once reality settles in. Time is the element that exposes truth. Detachment allows time to do what emotional explanations never could. As days turn into weeks, and weeks turn into months, the absence of your presence begins to register. Not dramatically at first, quietly, she notices there's no one grounding her when she's overwhelmed. No one offering steady emotional leadership. No one who listens without judgment or reacts without insecurity. These realizations don't arrive all at once. They accumulate slowly, stacking on top of each other until they form clarity. This is where contrast becomes undeniable. She may meet other men. She may receive attention, compliments, validation, even excitement. But most of that attention is shallow. It lacks depth. It lacks emotional safety. It lacks direction. When she compares those experiences to what she had with you, the difference becomes clear. Not because you were perfect, but because you were present, stable, and emotionally solid. qualities that are rare and irreplaceable. Detachment creates space for comparison, and comparison is what reveals value. As long as you were there, she had nothing to measure you against. You were the baseline. Once you're gone, every interaction she has with others becomes a reference point. And slowly, she realizes that what she lost wasn't just a relationship, it was a standard. What makes this realization powerful is that it doesn't come from guilt or persuasion. It comes from lived experience. She feels the absence in moments that matter, when she wants to talk and no one truly listens, when she seeks reassurance and receives emptiness, when she looks for consistency and finds chaos. These moments trigger reflection, and reflection brings regret. But detachment also protects your value during this process. Because you didn't argue, beg, or try to convince her of your worth, your image remains intact. You didn't shrink yourself to be chosen. You didn't plead to be understood. You simply stepped back with dignity. That restraint preserves respect. And respect is the foundation of attraction. Men often make the mistake of trying to explain their value when they feel unappreciated. They list what they did, how much they cared, how loyal they were. But value explained is value weakened. Detachment avoids this trap entirely. It lets your absence speak for you, and absence, when paired with self-respect, amplifies value far more than presence ever could. As time goes on, she may begin to reinterpret past moments. Conversations that once seemed ordinary take on new meaning. Gestures she overlooked become significant. Your patience, your leadership, your emotional consistency, traits she didn't consciously appreciate, start standing out in her memory. This is how detachment rewrites the narrative in her mind, not through manipulation, but through perspective. However, this process doesn't only affect her. Detachment reveals your value to yourself as well. As you step away, you begin to notice how much you are giving without receiving, how much emotional labor you carried, how often you compromised your needs to keep the connection alive. Distance brings clarity, and clarity strengthens boundaries. You begin to understand that your value isn't dependent on being chosen by someone who couldn't see it. You realize that your presence is a privilege, not a guarantee. This internal shift is critical because it ensures that even if she does recognize your worth later, you're no longer willing to accept less than what aligns with your standards. This is where true power emerges. When she finally sees your value, you're no longer waiting to be seen. When she begins to miss what she lost, you're no longer defined by that loss. You've grown beyond the version of yourself that needed recognition to feel whole. Detachment also eliminates false urgency. You're no longer rushing to fix, save, or resurrect something that wasn't aligned. You allow time to reveal whether her realization leads to meaningful change or temporary emotion, because value recognized without behavior to match is still undervaluation. If she reaches out after time has passed, the dynamic is different. You're no longer the man seeking clarity. You're the man observing behavior. You listen, you assess, you respond from choice, not longing. And this is where detachment proves its final lesson. Value is not proven by how much someone misses you, but by how they show up when they have another chance. And if she never reaches out at all, detachment still completes its purpose, because your value was never meant to be validated by her recognition. It was meant to be embodied by your actions. Detachment ensures that you never again stay in a situation where your presence is taken lightly. This is the quiet strength of detachment. It doesn't chase acknowledgement. It allows realization to unfold naturally or not at all. Either way, you win, because the man who detaches correctly doesn't lose himself in the process. He becomes clearer, stronger, and more aligned with who he truly is. Over time, this alignment attracts healthier connections, people who recognize value without needing to lose it first, people who reciprocate effort, people who respect boundaries. And when you experience that level of mutual appreciation, you understand something deeply. Anyone who thought losing you was nothing simply didn't have the capacity to value you while you were there. Detachment doesn't make you disappear. It makes your impact visible. It reveals the truth slowly, honestly, and without force. And once that truth is revealed to her or to yourself, you never go back to being undervalued again. The most misunderstood truth about detachment is that its real purpose has nothing to do with her coming back. Most men begin detachment hoping for a reaction, a message, regret, a realization, an apology, and while those things sometimes happen, they are not the point. The point of detachment is growth. It is the process of reclaiming yourself after you slowly abandoned your own needs, standards, and direction in an effort to keep someone else close. When detachment is done correctly, her return becomes irrelevant because you no longer measure your worth by whether someone chooses you or not. At the beginning, this idea feels uncomfortable. When you've invested emotionally, it's natural to want closure, validation, or proof that what you shared mattered. But that desire keeps you tied to the past. It keeps your identity anchored to her response instead of your own evolution. Detachment cuts that cord. It forces you to stand alone emotionally, and that solitude is where growth begins. Growth starts with facing the truth you avoided while attached. You begin to see how much of your time, energy, and focus revolved around her moods, availability, and approval. You recognize how often you delayed your own goals, compromised your boundaries, or silenced your instincts to avoid conflict or loss. This realization can be painful because it exposes how far you drifted from yourself, but pain is part of transformation. Without it, growth remains superficial. As you detach, your energy returns to you. That energy doesn't disappear, it redirects. The mental space once occupied by overthinking texts, rereading conversations, and waiting for signs becomes available for purpose. You start sleeping better, training harder, thinking clearer. You begin investing in your work, your health, your discipline, and your mission. This is not a distraction, it's a realignment. This realignment changes how you move through the world. You become less reactive and more intentional. You stop chasing outcomes and start building a life. And this shift is visible even if you never announce it. People sense when a man is grounded in himself. There is a calm authority that emerges when you are no longer seeking validation externally. Ironically, this is often when she begins to feel the loss most deeply, not because you disappeared, but because you evolved. She sees that you didn't collapse without her. You didn't beg, you didn't spiral publicly, you continued forward. That forward motion challenges the narrative she once believed that you needed her more than she needed you. Growth rewrites that story without a single word, but even here, growth remains the goal, not her reaction. Because the moment your growth depends on whether she notices, it stops being growth, it becomes performance. True detachment is quiet, it doesn't announce progress, it doesn't seek acknowledgement, it builds strength privately. As you grow, your standards sharpen. You begin to recognize behaviors you once tolerated that no longer align with who you are. Inconsistency, emotional ambiguity, lack of effort. You no longer romanticize potential or chase breadcrumbs. Growth teaches you discernment, the ability to choose alignment over attachment. This is why detachment protects your future relationships. It teaches you that chemistry without consistency leads to chaos, that attraction without respect leads to imbalance. You stop mistaking intensity for intimacy. You stop confusing attention with commitment. These lessons don't come from books or advice alone. They come from lived experience processed through growth. If she returns during this phase, the dynamic is completely different. You are no longer the man hoping to be chosen. You are the man deciding whether what she offers fits the life you are building. You listen more than you speak. You observe actions instead of words. You no longer rush intimacy or overlook red flags for the sake of connection. And this shift often surprises her more than your absence ever did. But growth also prepares you for the possibility that she never returns. And this is the part most men fear initially, but later feel grateful for, because growth reveals that her return was never required for your happiness, fulfillment, or self-respect. You realize that the relationship was a chapter, not the whole story. This realization brings emotional freedom. You stop living in the past or projecting into imaginary futures. You become present, and presence is powerful. It allows you to enjoy progress without anxiety. It allows you to build without constantly looking over your shoulder emotionally. Growth also changes the kind of love you seek. You no longer want love that feels uncertain, unbalanced, or emotionally draining. You want love that feels steady, reciprocal, and respectful. And because you embody those qualities yourself, you naturally attract them in others. The most profound shift detachment creates is identity-based. You stop seeing yourself as someone who was left, lost, or undervalued. You begin to see yourself as someone who outgrew a dynamic that no longer served him. That identity shift is permanent. Once it happens, you don't revert back to chasing validation or fearing abandonment. And here's the quiet truth. When a man truly grows from detachment, he becomes unforgettable not because he tried to be remembered, but because he became rare. Rare in his self-control, rare in his boundaries, rare in his emotional maturity. Whether she ever admits it or not, that rarity is felt. But even that is secondary, because the greatest reward of detachment-led growth is internal peace. The peace of knowing you didn't abandon yourself to keep someone else comfortable. The peace of knowing you chose integrity over attachment. The peace of knowing your life is moving forward with or without external approval. Detachment teaches you that love should add to your life, not consume it. That a relationship should complement your purpose, not replace it. And once you internalize that lesson, you never again build your identity around someone else's presence. In the end, growth ensures that no matter how the story concludes, reunion, separation, or silence, you emerge stronger, wiser, and more aligned than before. She may come back and see the man you've become. She may not. But either way, detachment has already done its job, because the real victory was never about proving your value to her. It was about remembering it yourself and building a life that reflects it every single day.